You know the moment. You're standing in a kitchen that isn't yours yet. The agent's hanging back, giving you space, because they know exactly what's happening. And you're just looking at the island, at the light pouring through that window over the sink, at a version of yourself making coffee there every morning for the next 30 years. And some part of your brain, the part that doesn't do math, just goes, yeah, this is it. This is the house. Now, fast forward 6 years. Same kitchen. Except it's 11 at night. You're tired in a way sleep doesn't touch. And you're staring at a stack of mail. A property tax bill that went up again. A quote from a contractor about the roof. A notice that the HOA dues just climbed too. And you're doing that thing where you try to remember the last time you felt like you could actually breathe financially. Not breathe in the house, breathe in your life. That gap between the kitchen moment and the 11 o'clock moment, that's what we're getting into today. Because almost nobody plans for that gap. Nobody budgets for it. Not because people are careless with money, but because a bigger house never tells you up front what it's going to cost. It just starts billing you, quietly, in about 11 different currencies, and most of them aren't dollars. So let's actually talk about it. Not to scare you off owning a home, that's not the point here. But to show you what's really going on when your square footage goes up and your financial breathing room goes down, even while your income is climbing too. Because this happens to people making $60,000 a year, and it happens to people making $300,000 a year. Income doesn't protect you from this. Only seeing it coming does. Here's the thing nobody tells you when you're house hunting. We've been trained, culturally, to think of a bigger house as an upgrade, like leveling up in a game. More bedrooms better, more bathrooms better. Finished basement, obviously better. And on paper, more space sounds like it should just mean more good things. More room for the kids, more room to host Thanksgiving, more room to breathe. But money doesn't work the way our gut works. Our gut is built for simple trades, more space for more money. Fair deal. Done. Money runs on systems, compounding systems, recurring systems, opportunity cost systems. And a house might be the single biggest system most people will ever buy into. And most people buy in using instinct instead of math. I want to be clear about something, because this isn't a video about how homeownership is bad, or how everyone should rent a one-bedroom forever and never put down roots. That's not it. For a lot of people, owning a home is still one of the best financial moves they'll ever make. The problem isn't the house. The problem is the mismatch buying more house than your actual life needs. Because it felt like the responsible next step. Because everyone around you was doing it. Or because a bigger house felt like proof you'd finally made it. And look, that instinct is human. It's not stupid. It's not a character flaw. We're wired to read status and security off of physical space. For most of human history, more shelter literally meant more safety, more food storage, more protection for your family. Your brain hasn't caught up to property taxes and HVAC replacement costs. It's still running ancient software that says big and safe are the same thing. There's also something specific happening in American culture here, worth naming directly. The starter home idea, buy small, build equity, trade up, got baked into the national psyche for decades. Real estate agents will tell you to buy the most house you can afford. Like affordability is just about qualifying for the loan. Banks will approve you for a payment that's technically within their risk tolerance, which isn't even close to a payment that leaves your actual life room to breathe. Nobody in that transaction is incentivized to ask you the harder question. The agent gets a bigger commission on a bigger sale. The lender gets more interest on a bigger loan. You're the only person in the room whose job is to protect your own future. And you're also the most emotionally compromised person in that room, standing in that kitchen, under that light. So if you've ever felt that pull, the bigger house, the better neighborhood, the place with room to grow, and felt almost embarrassed for wanting it, stop. You're not weak for wanting more space. You're human, operating inside a system quietly designed to get you to say yes before you've had time to think it through. The want isn't the issue. The issue is that almost nobody shows you the real cost of saying yes to it. So let's look at it piece by piece. Let's start with the part everyone already kind of knows but doesn't fully feel. The mortgage payment isn't the cost of the house. It's the cost of admission. Say you're choosing between a home that costs $300,000 and one that costs $450,000. Most people run the math on the monthly payment difference. See, it's maybe $700 or $800 more, and think, okay, we can swing that. We'll just be a little tighter for a while. And that's the first place the math quietly breaks. Because that monthly comparison is only counting one cost out of maybe 8. Property taxes scale with home value. And in a lot of states, they don't just scale once, they get reassessed, sometimes every year, sometimes whenever the home sells, and the new buyer's price resets the basis for the whole neighborhood. So that bigger house isn't just costing you more taxes today. It's quietly locking you into paying more for as long as you own it, on a number that tends to only move one direction. In some states, it's a slow creep. In others, it can genuinely blindside people a reassessment year, where the bill jumps $1,000 or more. Zero warning. Just a letter in the mail telling you your home is now worth more. Like that's good news, when really it just means you owe more. Insurance scales too. Bigger home, more square footage to insure. Often a higher replacement cost if something goes wrong. And depending on where you live, flood zones, wildfire zones, hurricane zones, that number can jump in ways that have nothing to do with your behavior and everything to do with the size and location of the structure you're now responsible for. People across Florida, California, and the Gulf Coast have watched premiums double in just a few years, with zero changes on their end. A bigger house just means more to insure, and insurers price that in without sentiment. Then there's the one almost nobody mentions until they're living it. Utilities don't scale evenly. They scale aggressively. A house with twice the square footage doesn't cost twice as much to heat and cool. It often costs more than that. More exterior wall losing heat in winter and gaining it in summer. More rooms needing their own airflow. Sometimes a whole second HVAC zone. Vaulted ceilings that look gorgeous and are famously expensive to heat because all that warm air just rises into space nobody's using. People who go from a small home to a big one are routinely floored that their utility bill didn't creep up by some modest percentage. It sometimes nearly doubled, especially anywhere with a real summer or a real winter. And then there's maintenance, maybe the sneakiest one of all, because maintenance costs don't show up monthly. They show up as a phone call you didn't see coming. Let me actually paint that phone call for you, because it's worth picturing specifically instead of abstractly. It's a Tuesday. You're at work. Your phone rings. It's the HVAC guy you called, because the upstairs unit, the one that only exists because the house has 2 stories and 2 zones, has been making a noise for a week. And he tells you the compressor's gone. Not a part. The whole compressor. On a system this size, this old, you're looking at $4,500, maybe more, depending on the refrigerant type, because of course the older systems run the refrigerant that got phased out and now costs 3 times as much. And you say, okay, thanks. Let me think about it. And you hang up, and you just sit there for a second, doing math you didn't plan on doing today. That's not a rare story. That's an ordinary Tuesday in the life of a bigger, older home. More square footage means a bigger roof that costs more to replace, and it will need replacing. On a schedule the house sets, not you. More linear feet of gutters and siding. More bathrooms, which means more pipes, more fixtures, more things that can leak in the middle of the night. A bigger lot that needs more landscaping. Maybe a pool. Maybe a sprinkler system with its own valves that fail off one by one over the years. A lot of financial planners use a rule of thumb budget around 1 to 2% of your home's value every year just for maintenance and repairs. On a $300,000 home, that's maybe 3 to 6 grand a year. On a $700,000 home, that's 7 to 14 grand a year every year. Whether or not anything actually breaks that specific year, because eventually something will, and it averages out to that over time. Now here's where it stops being a spreadsheet problem and starts being a psychology problem. Because everything so far is just the visible cost, the stuff you could, in theory, budget for if you tried hard enough. The real damage happens somewhere else entirely. It's called lifestyle inflation, and it might be the quietest wealth killer there is. Here's how it works. You move into a bigger, nicer house, and the house, without saying a word, starts asking things of you. The old couch looked fine in the old living room. In this living room, under these ceilings, it suddenly looks small and tired, and a little embarrassing when people visit, so you replace it. The old patio furniture was fine for the old backyard. This backyard kind of needs something nicer, doesn't it? Especially with that view. The empty rooms need furniture too, because empty rooms feel sad and unfinished. And people who buy big houses don't usually want to live in half-furnished ones for long. So slowly, almost invisibly, your spending creeps up to match your space, even though your space has nothing to do with your actual financial capacity. Let me make this real instead of theoretical. Picture two coworkers. Same job, same salary. Roughly $65,000 a year take home. One buys a modest 3-bedroom for $280,000. The other buys bigger 4 bedrooms, a bonus room, a 3-car garage for $420,000. Because, in his words, we might as well, rates aren't getting any lower and we want room to grow. 5 years pass. The first coworker's housing costs mortgage, taxes, insurance, average maintenance, all in land around $1,800 a month. The second one's land closer to $2,900. Once you count the bigger insurance policy, the bigger tax bill, the 2 HVAC systems, and one of those systems needing a repair in year 3. That's an $1,100 a month gap. Over 5 years, that's $66,000. Not in home value in cash that left their pocket and never came back, just to operate a bigger structure. But here's the part that doesn't show up in that number. And it's the part that actually matters more. The first coworker, because his housing costs left him real margin, started putting $400 a month into retirement the year he bought the house. The second coworker meant to do the same, genuinely meant to, but between furniture to fill the bigger rooms, the higher utility bills, and that one HVAC surprise, it kept getting pushed to next month. 5 years later, the first coworker has a real head start on long-term wealth. The second has a beautiful bonus room that mostly gets used twice a year, and a feeling, when he thinks about retirement, that he's somehow behind without being totally sure why. That feeling is the real cost. The money was just the mechanism. There's a deeper psychological mechanism running underneath all of this, and it's called hedonic adaptation. The simple, brutal truth that human beings adjust to almost anything good or bad faster than we expect. That kitchen island moment, the one that felt like everything, fades. Not because the kitchen got worse, because you got used to it. The brain stops registering things as exciting once they become the baseline. So, the bigger house, which felt like a real upgrade for maybe the first few months, eventually just becomes your house. Normal. The backdrop of an ordinary Tuesday, and the financial commitment that came with it doesn't fade along with the excitement. It just stays. Permanently, quietly pulling money out every single month, long after the thrill wore off. This is the part that wrecks people, and it's worth sitting with. You don't get to keep the joy. You only get to keep the bill. And there's one more layer to this that almost never gets talked about. Maybe the most important one. A bigger house doesn't just cost money. It costs time. And time, unlike money, you can't earn back, refinance, or pay down early. More square footage means more cleaning, full stop. More rooms means more stuff accumulates in them, because empty space has a strange way of filling itself, whether you mean for it to or not. A bigger lawn means more hours mowing it yourself, or more money paying someone else to, which is just the time cost converted back into a dollar cost. And here's the one that hits hardest for a lot of American families specifically. A bigger house often means a longer commute, because the bigger, more affordable houses tend to sit further out from city centers and job hubs, which means more hours in the car, every day, for years, sometimes decades. Let's actually run that math instead of just gesturing at it, because the number's more brutal than people expect. Say moving further out adds 50 minutes to your daily commute, round trip. And honestly, for a lot of American suburban sprawl, that's a conservative estimate. 50 minutes a day, 5 days a week, is over 4 hours a week. Over 4 hours a week is roughly 210 hours a year. 210 hours is the equivalent of more than 5 full 40-hour work weeks every single year spent sitting in a car, not earning money, not resting, not with your family, just commuting between a job and a house that's bigger than the one closer in. People will spend an entire weekend agonizing over a $400 difference in a monthly mortgage payment, and spend 0 minutes on this piece of math, even though over 10 years, that's 50 extra work weeks of their actual finite life traded for square footage. And there's a regional layer worth naming, because the size of this problem genuinely depends on where in the country you're doing it. In a lot of the Midwest and parts of the South, square footage is relatively cheap to buy, but maintenance and utility costs still scale the same way a bigger house in Ohio or Texas might carry a lower price tag than one near a coast. But it still demands the same bigger roof, the same bigger HVAC load, often a more punishing one, given how brutal Texas summers get. In high-cost metro areas, the Bay Area, parts of the Northeast, South Florida, the price tag itself does the damage, where bigger can mean an extra few $100,000 before you've even gotten to taxes and insurance, and where reassessments hit especially hard because the underlying values are already sky-high. The specifics shift by zip code. The pattern doesn't. So here's where the mindset has to shift, and it's a genuinely uncomfortable shift, because it runs against almost everything we are culturally taught to want. The turning point is this. A house is not an investment in your happiness. It's a fixed cost that determines how much freedom you have left over for everything else in your life. Say that differently. Every dollar that goes toward housing, the mortgage, the taxes, the insurance, the maintenance, the bigger furniture, the bigger utility bill is a dollar that can't go toward your retirement account, your kid's future, your ability to take a lower-paying job you'd actually enjoy more, your ability to take 6 months off if you needed to, your ability to sleep at night without doing math in your head at 11 o'clock. Financial peace doesn't come from the size of your house. It comes from the size of the gap between what you earn and what you're obligated to spend. That gap is called margin, and margin might be the single most underrated asset in personal finance, because margin is what gives you choices. Someone with a smaller house and a wide margin can absorb a job loss, a medical bill, a slow year, a career change, a shot at starting something new. Someone with a bigger house and a thin margin is one bad year away from real fear, no matter how nice the kitchen island is. Fear doesn't care how nice your kitchen is. It only cares whether the math works. And here's the part that should genuinely change how you think about this. House size and happiness barely correlate once you clear a basic threshold of comfort. Once you've got enough space that nobody's stepping over each other, that everyone has somewhere to sleep and somewhere to think, more square footage adds almost nothing to your actual day-to-day well-being. What it reliably adds is cost, visible and invisible, financial, attention, and time. The kitchen island doesn't make the coffee taste better after the first few months. It's just where you stand while you check your phone, same as anywhere else. This doesn't mean small is automatically virtuous, or that everyone should downsize out of guilt, or that ambition is the enemy. That'd just be a different version of the same mistake, making the decision based on a story instead of your actual life. The turning point isn't smaller is better. It's asking a more honest question before you buy, or even before you upgrade the one you're already in. Am I buying this because it serves the life I actually live? Or because it represents the life I think I'm supposed to want? That question changes everything, because most people have never actually asked it out loud to themselves, with no agent in the room and no light coming through a window nudging them along. Most people have only asked, can I afford the monthly payment? Almost nobody has asked, what does this house actually cost me in hours? In stress, in flexibility, in the version of my future where I still have real options. So what does this actually look like in real life? Not as a rigid rule, but as a way of thinking before you make this decision, or even reconsider the one you've already made. First, run the full cost, not the partial cost, before you fall in love with a place. Before you let yourself get emotionally attached to a listing, sit down and actually estimate property taxes for that specific area. Get a real insurance quote instead of guessing off your current policy. Look up typical utility costs for homes that size in that climate, and set a realistic maintenance estimate based on the home's age and systems. This takes maybe an hour, sometimes 2. Most people skip that hour and pay for it instead in small monthly surprises for 30 years. Second, calculate the time cost of location, not just the dollar cost of the house. If a cheaper, bigger home further out adds real time to your commute, put an actual number on it, the way we did earlier. An extra 50 minutes a day is over 200 hours a year. Ask yourself honestly what that time is worth to you, not in some abstract, motivational poster sense, but literally. What would you actually do with 200 hours? Is the extra square footage worth trading it away? Third, separate the emotional pull from the financial decision just for one evening before you sign anything. Walk through the home again, mentally, without the agent, without the warm lighting, without the moment. Picture it on an ordinary Tuesday in February, 6 years from now, when the excitement's worn off and it's just where you live. Does the decision still hold up at that emotional temperature? Or does it only make sense at the excited one standing in that kitchen, under that light? Fourth, protect your margin like it's an actual asset, because functionally it is one. Before committing to a mortgage payment, look honestly at what's left over after it, not just whether you can technically cover it, but whether you'd still have real room to save, to invest, to handle a surprise expense without panic, to say yes to something fun once in a while without flinching. A common guideline some financial planners use is keeping total housing costs, including taxes and insurance, under roughly 25 to 30% of your take-home pay, specifically so there's room left for everything else life requires. That's not a hard rule, and it's not personalized advice for your situation, but it's a useful gut check before a lender's much higher approval number convinces you that you can comfortably afford something you actually can't. Fifth, if you already own a bigger home than you probably needed, this isn't a call to panic and list it tomorrow. It's a call to be intentional about the spending around it from here forward. You can decide not to upgrade the furniture every time a room feels too big or too empty. You can decide the guest room doesn't need to be fully furnished just because it has 4 walls. You can choose to live in the house fully, gratefully even, without letting its size dictate a lifestyle of constant upgrading just to match the scale of the rooms. Awareness, applied from today forward, is worth almost as much as a different decision made 5 years ago. None of this requires extremes. Nobody needs to sell their home and move into a studio to prove a point to anyone, least of all themselves. This isn't about austerity, and it isn't about guilt. It's about making sure the biggest financial decision most people will ever make gets made with eyes fully open instead of eyes on a kitchen island, while the brain quietly, understandably, skips the harder math. If you're watching this and you already bought the bigger house, I want you to hear this clearly. You didn't do anything wrong. You did what almost everyone does. Because almost no one teaches us to think this way before we sign anything. You followed an instinct that's been wired into humans for tens of thousands of years, inside a financial system that didn't even exist 100 years ago. That's not a personal failure. That's just being a person in a world that moves faster than our instincts were ever built for. And if you're watching this before you've bought anything, before you're standing in some kitchen, letting the light talk you into something the math hasn't agreed to. Yet, just remember the goal was never the house. The house was always supposed to be in service of something bigger. More time with the people you love. More room to breathe, in the financial sense, not just the square footage sense. More choices later when you need them most instead of fewer. A smaller house with a wide margin will almost always buy you more peace than a bigger house with a thin one. Not because big is bad, and not because ambition deserves an apology. Because peace was the actual goal the whole time, and somewhere along the way, a lot of us got handed the wrong measuring stick and started measuring success in square feet instead of in the quiet, ordinary feeling of having enough room left over to actually live. You don't need the perfect financial decision. Nobody gets that, not even the people who look like they did. You just need a decision that leaves you room. Room to adjust, room to breathe, room to still feel like yourself 5 years in, standing in that same kitchen at 11 at night, feeling something closer to calm than panic. Progress, not perfection. That's the whole game. And honestly, it always was. If you want to save your hard-earned money and want to get rich using it, make sure to follow Sophia Invest.